Hi, guys. I thought it'd be prudent to talk about something that I've been getting back into recently, specifically the book Animal Farm by George Orwell. The reason is because, from my analysis of history, every society in history seems to follow a specific belief system or another. So, for example, all of Western Europe, for most of its history after the fall of Rome, has always been Christian. Nowadays, it's starting to become more agnostic, atheistic, but for its entire history from the fall of Rome until the World War period, it had a single belief structure, that being Christianity. In the similar vein, ever since the conquests by the Arabs, the Islamic faith has run the Middle East for all of time since. One particular belief system I can't seem to find a way to explain is communism. Obviously, the difference there being that Christianity, Islam are religions, communism is an ideology. But one thing I couldn't seem to wrap my head around was after so many failed attempts at the communist revolution, the attempts to create a perfect workers' paradise, communism is still palatable to people. It's still popular in some areas, despite all of the things that communism has done over the last 100 years. Whereas other ideologies, other religious structures, other belief systems are not as popular, despite A, doing much better for the societies that it has control over in terms of sheer moral quality, and B, not killing nearly as many people. So why is this? Well, from rereading Animal Farm, which was written by George Orwell and is basically explicitly an allegory for communism, one thing I've noticed is that, for those who aren't aware, Animal Farm essentially reads as a narrative of a group of people who band together to take down an oppressive tyrant, but once they have gotten rid of the tyrant, one of their members becomes the new tyrant of the farm. Which obviously is supposed to be a corollary of how they overthrow the Tsar in the Russian Revolution, but then you end up with the rise of Stalin, who is an even worse dictator than any of the Tsars before him. But why? Why is a movement that is built off of all animals being equal and all animals working together against humanity, why does that result in an oppressive dictatorship where one man manages to seize control of the entirety of their society? By the same vein, because it's an allegory, why was a movement, that being communism, which is supposed to be founded on egalitarianism, liberty, freedom for the worker, dissolving into a totalitarian dictatorship run by a madman who literally was a former bank robber? I would argue, from the research I've done into the real world, as well as rereading a lot of Animal Farm itself, I would argue the main reason for this is that, at least in the concept of the book, there's never a thought among the animals that they would need to police themselves. So, for example, Old Major, in his speech at the start of the book, when he outlines what the animals should do and how they should behave, he clearly says things like animals should not drink alcohol, animals should not sleep in a bed, but he never once says some animals will try to lead you astray. There's no concept that any of the animals themselves are inherently bad. All of the blame for the negative things happening to them are on Jones specifically and humanity more broadly. What this means is that, although they do have rules that they follow and something of a moral code, there's no inherent assumption that they need to check themselves, because in their mind, they are the good people who are saving the world from the evil humans. By that same logic, in the real world, Communism, as an ideology, has no internal mechanism for judging its members' behaviors because the inherent assumption is the good workers and proletariat are fighting against the evil bourgeoisie. All of the evil in that situation is on the bourgeoisie and the rich, whereas all of the good is on the side of the proletariat, the poor, the workers. But that also means that there is no feedback loop where, say, someone in the Communist Party could say something to the effect of, hey, this man on our side is a bad influence who is going to destroy the movement. The reason you can't say things like that is because in the inherent assumptions of the ideology, if you join the movement, you are a good guy. That's the thing about it, is that once you have become a member of the revolution, you cannot be evil, because all the evil is on the side of the rich people who the revolution is overthrowing. And in the same way, in Animal Farm, because there's no concept that animals themselves can be bad, there is no ability for anyone to stop Napoleon from doing what he does. For those who haven't read the book, Napoleon hides away a bunch of dogs and secretly takes those dogs away, trains them to be basically his lap dogs, and he uses them as a tool to kick out the other pig, Snowball, and then he uses them to basically corral the rest of the farm into doing what he wants, while also using various tricks of word, using various things like essentially propaganda with his buddy Squealer to convince the farm to go along with what he says, which ultimately results in the farm turning into the very thing that they revolted against, an oppressive regime wherein a single man and his buddies oppress the majority of the animals for their own gain. And just like in the real world, Stalin manages to get control of the party, by which he gets control of the secret police, by which he then uses the secret police to purge anyone and everyone in the Soviet Union who did not agree with him, to ensure that he stayed in power, which then resulted in the Soviet Union turning into an oppressive authoritarian government with a single leader at the top, while the majority of the population is basically corralled by guns to do whatever their great leader wants. But to this day, whenever you hear anyone propounding communism, whenever you hear socialism more broadly being parroted as a good idea, they never mention this. All you ever really hear is the good stuff, the fighting for liberty and equality. You never hear about how it degenerates into tyranny. Why? Well, I mean, think about it. Imagine you're trying to get political power, and people like you have tried to get it in the past and have sometimes succeeded, but there's opposition to what you're saying. Why would you then highlight the bad things your side has done when you are the one trying to get into power now? So obviously, when people today who avow themselves to be communists, socialists, and people of that flavor, people who admire Lenin, admire Stalin, more broadly, they admire Mao or Castro or whoever you happen to be talking about, obviously they would never bring up how every single one of these movements degenerates like this, because the Animal Farm narrative is not just what happened in the Soviet Union. It also happened in communist China, it happened in Cuba, it happened in North Korea, it happened in all of the Eastern Bloc countries the Soviets took over, it happened in Nicaragua. But obviously, they would never tell you any of this, because they still want power. These very same people still exist, they still want power, and they are deliberately not telling us the full story. Because if they did, they would be completely discredited. Imagine if someone today tried to argue for fascist policy, and never once mentioned the crimes fascists committed. They just talked about the things they thought were good. You've essentially got the same thing coming from communists, where they'll argue all day about all of their good ideas and their good morals and how they're the right side of history and everything. And then you turn around and look into any history and you find out that 100 million people have died because of these people. And they're still allowed to be a major ideology that can be viewed as good by people in the United States of America, which beat the Soviet Union in the Cold War. But yeah, Animal Farm's a great book. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It is a very good analogy for what actually happened in the real world with the communist movement. Thanks for watching.